Christmas, Halls of the Damned. They found the house on Christmas morning, a small place on the outskirts of Marfa, Texas. White lights still blinking on the porch. A plastic reindeer knocked over in the dead grass. And the front door wide open, letting the winter crawl inside. Deputy Rosa Cantu was the first to enter. The smell hit her before anything else. Copper and meat. The thick, humid stench of a butcher's floor. She covered her mouth with her sleeve, but it pushed through anyway, coating her tongue, sliding down her throat. The living room looked like a ritual site. Furniture shoved against the walls. A circle drawn on the hardwood in something dark and wet. Symbols scratched into the floor. Old symbols. The kind her grandmother used to ward against with salt and prayer. And in the center of that circle, arranged in a neat spiral pattern, sat 23 human teeth. Small ones. A child's teeth. No body. No blood trail. Just the teeth. And the open door. And the smell. On the kitchen table, Deputy Cantu found a note. 3 words, written in a shaking hand. He wore red. Somewhere outside, the wind picked up. It sounded almost like laughter. Before we begin, I want to thank every soul that keeps returning to listen. You've turned whispers into echoes. If you haven't already, subscribe and stay close, because what you're about to hear is one story you won't forget. 4 weeks before Deputy Cantu found that empty house, 4 truckers gathered at Dead Man's Rest, a truck stop diner where the coffee tastes like penance, and the jukebox hasn't worked since '89. Christmas lights flickered against the windows, red and green reflections swimming in the black glass. Outside, the Texas desert stretched flat and endless, swallowing the last of the daylight. Earl Womack sat in the corner booth, cigarette smoke curling around his weathered face. 30 years on the road had carved deep lines into his skin, and something in his eyes suggested he'd seen things that carved even deeper. Across from him, Maria Delgado nursed a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. The other truckers called her La Llorona, not because she wept, but because she knew the old stories, the ones her grandmother whispered in the dark, the ones about the things that walk between worlds when the veil grows thin. Young Danny Chen sat beside her, still fresh enough to think the road was adventure, still young enough to believe he was safe. And in the corner, wrapped in shadows like a second skin, sat old Thomas. Nobody knew his real name. Nobody asked. He'd been hauling loads through these desert highways since before the interstate existed, and the years had filled him with secrets that leaked out sometimes when the night grew long. You hear about the Hartley place? Earl's voice was gravel scraping glass. Out past Marfa? Maria's hand tightened on her cup. I heard. What happened? Danny asked. Earl took a long drag. Let the smoke out slow. Family of 4, parents and 2 kids. Week before Christmas, they just stopped existing. House looked like someone had been practicing the old arts inside. Symbols on the floor. Teeth left behind like calling cards. Danny laughed nervously. That's gotta be some serial killer thing, right? Some psycho? Nobody answered. Old Thomas stirred his coffee. The spoon clinked against ceramic, a small cold sound in the silence. The winter brings them out, he said finally. His voice was dry leaves, scraping concrete. The ones who wear faces that don't belong to them. The ones who've been making bargains with the dark since before your great-grandmothers were born. He looked up. His eyes caught the Christmas lights, and for just a moment they reflected wrong. Too bright, too deep. You've all seen things. I know you have. Driven these roads long enough, and the roads show you what hides alongside them. Earl stubbed out his cigarette. Maria crossed herself. So, let's stop pretending, old Thomas continued. Let's speak the truth for once. Before the solstice comes, before the long night opens the doors that should stay shut. The wind screamed against the windows, and, one by one, the truckers began to speak. Earl lit another cigarette. His hands weren't steady. 2 years ago, he said, December 22nd. I was running a load of furniture down from Amarillo, taking the back highways to avoid the weather. He stared at the ember of his cigarette like it held answers. I stopped at a rest area around 3 in the morning. Middle of nowhere. Just a concrete bathroom, a few parking spots, one light buzzing overhead like a dying fly. I needed to clear my head, shake off the highway hypnosis. Danny nodded. Every trucker knew that trance, the way the white lines blur together until you're driving through a dream. I was standing by my rig, smoking, looking at the stars, and that's when I heard it. Earl's voice dropped. Singing, a woman's voice, but wrong, like she was singing through a throat full of mud, like something was gurgling up from deep inside her, mixing with the melody. Maria's hand went to the small cross around her neck. I couldn't see anyone, just desert and dark in that one 6th Street light. But the singing kept getting closer, and I started to smell something. He paused, took a drag that hollowed his cheeks. You ever smelled a body? A real one? One that's been sitting in a ditch for a week? Danny shook his head. Earl's eyes said he wished he could do the same. It was that smell. Sweet rot, meat turning to soup, and under it, something else. Herbs, burnt sage, the kind of smell my grandmother said meant someone had been working roots nearby. Hexwork, she called it. Old Thomas nodded slowly. The old practitioners, they leave traces. The singing got clearer, some kind of Christmas carol. Silent Night, I think. But the words were different. Wrong words, backwards words, words that made my teeth ache just hearing them. Earl stubbed out his cigarette, lit another immediately. Then I saw her. The diner seemed to lean in. She came out of the dark maybe 30 feet away, a woman in a white dress, old-fashioned, like something from a photograph your great-grandmother would keep in a locked drawer. And she was beautiful, the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. His voice cracked. But she wasn't walking. She was floating, maybe an inch off the gravel, and her mouth was moving with the song, but her lips were wrong, too wide, split at the corners, and behind them I could see her teeth. What about them? Danny whispered. Black, every single one, black as rot, sharp as needles, and there were too many, rows and rows of them, going back into her throat like a shark's. Earl's cigarette trembled. She held out her hand to me, still singing, still floating, and I knew in my bones, in my blood, in the part of me that remembers what my ancestors ran from in the old country, that if I took that hand, I would become part of her collection. What did you do? I ran, threw myself into my rig, and drove. Didn't stop until I hit Lubbock, 200 miles, with the pedal on the floor and my eyes on the mirror. Earl looked at the others. His eyes were wet. She follows me now. Every night I hear her singing outside whatever motel I'm in. Every morning I find footprints in the frost outside my door, and the footprints don't have toes. He took a shaky drag. She's waiting, patient as a grave, and every December she gets a little closer. Danny didn't want to speak, but the silence pressed against him, and the words came anyway. This isn't a trucking story, he said. This is from when I was 8 years old. Old Thomas nodded. The oldest stories always are. I grew up in Odessa. My dad was a trucker. That's how I got into this life. He was on the road most of December, so my mom took me to holiday events, community things. Danny's hands wrapped around his coffee mug, stealing its warmth. There was a charity basketball game at the high school, cops versus firefighters. They had a Santa giving out candy canes. It was supposed to be wholesome, safe. His grip tightened. I wandered off. Kids do that. I was looking at the trophy cases in the hallway, reading the names on the plaques, when I felt something behind me. Maria leaned forward. Felt? Not heard. Felt. Like the air got heavier. Like something was standing close enough to touch me, and it had weight that pressed against my back. Danny's voice flattened. The voice of someone describing a wound that never healed. I looked at the trophy case glass, and I saw him reflected there. A man, standing right behind me, close enough to breathe on my neck. What did he look like? Normal. That's what made it worse. Nice coat, clean shave, friendly smile. He said his name was Mr. Holly, said he was looking for his lost son, asked if I'd help him search the building. Danny swallowed hard. I knew not to go with strangers. My mom had drilled that into me. But his voice did something to my legs, made them want to follow, like his words had fishhooks in them, pulling me forward. Old Thomas's eyes narrowed. Fairy tongue, the speech of the old ones. It bends the will like wire. I started walking with him, away from the gym, away from the crowd. The hallway got darker the further we went, and I noticed things that were wrong. Danny set down his mug. There were red marks on his palms. His shadow didn't match his body. It was too long, too thin, and it had extra arms that moved independently, reaching along the walls, reaching toward me. Earl muttered something under his breath. And his smell. Under the cologne, there was something older, rotten soil, like he'd crawled out of a grave and put on nice clothes. What happened? My mom found me. She came around the corner yelling my name, and the second she saw him, her face went white, pure white, like she could see something I couldn't. And she started praying, out loud, in Spanish, words I'd never heard her use. Danny's voice shook. He just smiled at her, that friendly smile. But his eyes weren't friendly anymore. They were old, ancient, hungry. He tipped an invisible hat and said, "Another time, perhaps." Then he walked out to the back door. Did your mom explain? She never talked about it, not once. But that night, she burned something in our backyard. Herbs and photographs and something that looked like hair. And she drew symbols on my windowsill with salt and ash. Danny looked up. I thought I'd imagined it, the shadow, the eyes. Kids make things up, right? But, Maria prompted, but last month I stopped at a gas station in Fort Stockton. 3 a.m, empty lot. I was paying at the counter when I felt it again. That weight, that pressure. And I looked out the window. Danny's voice dropped to a whisper. He was standing next to my rig. Same coat, same smile, same face. Exactly the same. 16 years, and he hadn't aged a single day. And when he saw me looking, he waved. Did he speak? He mouthed something. I could read his lips through the glass. Danny looked at each of them. "I told you, Danny." Another time. The wind howled outside. The Christmas lights flickered. He knew my name. After 16 years, and his face. The longer I looked, the more it started to shift. Like the mask was slipping. Like something else was pushing through from underneath. Something with too many teeth. Danny pushed his coffee away. "I don't stop at night anymore. I drive straight through. I don't care if I'm exhausted, because I know he's out there, still hunting, still waiting." He looked at the door. "And his another time is coming soon." Maria lit a candle. She'd carried it with her for 5 years, a small votive in a red glass holder. Protection, her grandmother would have called it. A tiny sun against the dark. "My family ran a Christmas tree business," she said. "Before me, my husband Rodrigo, our daughter Sophia. Every December, we'd drive to the mountains outside Durango, load up fresh-cut pines, haul them down to sell." She watched the flame dance. "5 years ago, we made our last run." Old Thomas closed his eyes, like he already knew. The snow started at sunset, heavy and fast. By the time we crossed the pass, the roads were white, and the world had gone silent. That silence snow makes, when it eats all the sound. Everyone nodded. Sophia was 7. She was sleeping in the back seat, wrapped in blankets, her face pressed against the cold window. Rodrigo was driving. I was watching the trees slide past, these huge old pines, thick with snow, when I smelled something. Her voice tightened. Sap. Pine resin, but concentrated, overwhelming. Like the forest itself was sweating, pushing something out of its pores. And underneath that sweetness, something rotten. Old meat, old death. Earl shifted. The smell. It was always the smell. Then Rodrigo made a sound, this low noise in his throat. And I looked where he was looking. Maria's hand trembled near the candle. Shapes between the trees, running alongside the truck. At first I thought deer. They moved like deer, that bounding, graceful motion. But deer don't have arms. Deer don't have hands with too many fingers. Danny's face went pale. They were white, not pale. White, bone white, naked in the freezing cold, and the snow didn't stick to their skin. It melted before it touched them, like they burned from the inside, and they were fast. We were doing 50, 60 miles an hour, and they kept pace like we were standing still. Maria touched the candle glass. Then the engine died. No sputter, no warning, just silence. We rolled to a stop in the middle of nowhere, snow piling on the windshield, and those things circled us. How many? 12, maybe more. Hard to count when they moved so fast, but they circled, patient, like wolves with a trapped animal, and they were smiling, these wide, too wide smiles, all teeth, teeth like broken glass. Maria's voice broke slightly. They started scratching at the doors, at the windows, long fingers with nails like thorns, not trying to break in, just scratching, testing, tasting our fear through the metal and glass. Then Sophia woke up. Maria wiped her eyes. My baby girl woke up and saw those faces pressed against her window, white faces with black eyes and smiles that split their cheeks. And she screamed, this high, pure scream that seemed to excite them. When she screamed, they laughed. This sounded like icicles breaking, like frozen branches snapping, and one of them, the tallest one, pressed its mouth to the glass and started breathing on it, and in the fog its breath made, it drew a symbol. Old Thomas opened his eyes. What symbol? A spiral with a cross through it. My grandmother had that symbol burned into wood above her doorway. She said it was a marker, a claim. Maria looked at the candle. I started praying, every prayer I knew, and I remembered something my grandmother taught me, an old song, not Spanish, older, words from before Spain. I started singing it, and the scratching stopped. Just stopped. They pulled back from the truck, slowly, still smiling, but something in my voice, in those old words, pushed them away. And we sat there, me singing, Rodrigo frozen, Sophia silent, until dawn broke over the mountains. The second the sun touched the snow, they ran, fast as shadows, back into the trees, back into the dark places between the pines, and the engine started on the first try. She twisted her wedding ring. We drove down the mountain in silence. Rodrigo hasn't driven since. The nightmares won't let him. And Sophia... Maria stopped. Sophia hasn't spoken in 5 years, not one word. The doctors say trauma, but I know the truth. Those things took something from her when they pressed against that glass. Some piece of her voice, some piece of her warmth. She looked up, and every winter I feel them watching, from the cold places, from the shadows between trees, waiting for my song to fail. Old Thomas set down his coffee. For the first time all night, his ancient face showed something like fear. You've all told your truths. Now I'll tell mine. He folded his weathered hands. This isn't my story. It's my grandson's. Was my grandson's, before Christmas took him. The diner seemed to grow colder. 12 years ago, a little town called Dryden, population 200 and falling. My daughter lived there with her boy, Marcus, 8 years old, smart kid, tough kid, knew the desert like he knew his own name. Thomas's voice was steady, but his hands weren't. December 23rd. My daughter had to work a double shift, the only waitress at the only diner for 30 miles. She didn't like leaving Marcus alone, but he was responsible. Had a neighbor who checked in, had my number by the phone. Thomas looked at the window, at the snow falling outside. Around sunset, the neighbor called to check on him. Marcus said he was fine, watching TV, eating cereal, normal 8-year-old things. But he mentioned something strange. What? He said there was a man standing at the end of the driveway, just standing there, watching the house, wearing a Santa suit. Danny inhaled sharply. The neighbor told him to lock the doors, stay away from the windows. She'd be over in 10 minutes. Marcus said okay, said the Santa man was just standing there, not moving, just watching. Thomas's jaw tightened. When the neighbor arrived, the front door was open. The TV was still playing. Marcus's cereal was still on the table, half-eaten, milk turning warm. But Marcus was gone. Maria crossed herself. They searched for 3 days. Dogs, helicopters, every able body in the county. Found nothing, no tracks, no blood, no sign of struggle. Just gone, like he'd been erased from the world. Thomas reached into his pocket, pulled out a small object, set it on the table, a tooth, small, a child's tooth. They found this on the kitchen floor, right in the center of a symbol someone had scratched into the linoleum. That same spiral, that same cross, the mark of the winter court. Earl stared at the tooth. And the man in the Santa suit? Nobody ever saw him. No cameras caught him. No neighbors remembered him driving in. He just appeared, watched, took what he came for, and vanished. Thomas picked up the tooth, held it gently. I started researching after that. The old books, the forbidden histories. The witch knowledge my grandmother had burned when She came to America because she thought leaving it behind would keep us safe. His eyes were hard. I learned things, terrible things, about the collectors, the ones who wear red in winter, who come down chimneys not to give but to take, who've been stealing children since before Christianity dressed them up as jolly gift givers. What are they? Danny asked. Servants of the old winter, of the cold dark that ruled before humans built fires. They wear the red suit now because we gave them that mask. But underneath, there's something older, something that needs young flesh to survive the thaw, something that collects teeth as trophies, as proof of purchase. Thomas put the tooth back in his pocket. My daughter never recovered, died 2 years later. Heart attack, they said, but I know better. Grief killed her. The not knowing killed her. He stood slowly. I've spent 12 years hunting the thing that took Marcus. 12 years learning the old wards, the banishing songs, the witch signs that keep them at bay. And every Christmas I get a little closer. He looked at each of them. But I've also learned this. They never work alone. The singer, the stalker, the pale court, the red collector, they're all part of the same old darkness, the same ancient hunger, and they're getting bolder. Thomas buttoned his coat. The solstice is in 3 days, the longest night, their strongest night, and this year I have a lead, a name, a location. He walked toward the door. You want to survive Christmas? Stay off the roads after dark. Salt your doorways. Don't answer for anyone wearing red. And if you hear singing in the night, he paused with his hand on the door. Run. Don't look back. Don't stop to listen. Just run. Old Thomas walked out into the snow. Through the window they watched him climb into his ancient rig, watched his taillights disappear into the white. And then Earl noticed something that made his blood freeze. The snow had stopped, the wind had died, and, standing at the edge of the parking lot, just barely visible in the glow of the Christmas lights, was a figure in a red suit, watching, smiling, waiting. Deputy Rosa Cantu stands in the center of the ruined living room, the spiral on the floor, the teeth arranged just so, the symbols scratched into wood. She doesn't know about Earl Womack, who stopped answering his CB 2 nights ago, whose rig was found empty on Highway 285, engine running, a woman's voice singing through the static. She doesn't know about Danny Chen, who missed his last 3 check-ins, whose phone was found at a gas station in Fort Stockton, screen cracked, a child's handwriting scratched into the back, another time. She doesn't know about Maria Delgado, whose rig was discovered in a mountain pass, buried in snow that shouldn't have fallen, who left behind a candle still burning and a recording on her phone of something scratching at glass. She doesn't know about old Thomas, who was last seen driving toward a place that doesn't appear on any map, who left behind a journal filled with symbols that hurt to look at, and a final entry that simply read, I found him. God help me. I found what took Marcus. And it's not alone.